The Samrangana Sutradhara. The Samrangana Sutradhara is an encyclopedic work, attributed by tradition to the Paramara King Bhojadeva, and collecting a vast number of subject matters under the general heading of Vastu. Although probably incomplete in the available manuscripts, its size remains impressive, including the interpolated section. It runs for almost 7,500 Sanskrit verses. The different portions resemble, in turn, a Purana, a treatise on architecture, a disquisition into dramaturgic detail, and more. TT also includes a chapter on flying machines that has elicited a certain amount of curiosity in recent times. Sections of the text have been studied and referred to by a number of modern scholars. Shukla's extensive study of Indian architecture uses the Samrangana Sutradhara as its basic source. Otter's more recent analysis of the chapters dealing with residential architecture, besides providing a careful translation of relevant sections, offers a detailed account of important features defining the entirety of the text. Samrangana Sutradhara is a compound word that offers several possible interpretive alternatives. Otter has offered a good case for his translation as the stage manager, Sutradhara, of battlefields, Samrangana, proposing it as a plausible Bharata, epithet, of King Bhoja. The compound has also been translated as architect of human dwellings, resting on a different understanding of its etymology. A classical Sanskrit author would in any case have been aware of the possibility of multiple exegeses. Sutradhara, in the very first verse, is again used in reference to Siva, and would certainly not have considered this a flaw. Authorship and date. The text has been attributed to King Bhoja, but it would be difficult to assess the precise role he might have had in its compilation. The possibilities range from inspiration and patronage, to full authorship. Otter has offered a lengthy analysis of the inconsistencies, both in terms of style and of content, which would make it hard to support the idea of the Samrangana Sutradhara being the work of a single author. As Otter himself acknowledges, though, his statement is far from being conclusive. After all, most in all the Manvantaras, the earth is born uneven, therefore Vanya, Pathu, uprooted the rock webs from all sides. The first two interpretations of the compound, presented in the previous section, suggest that evenness may be regarded as a desirable quality. One of Pathu's foremost tasks is to make flat what is uneven. By extension, we may understand the same as a crucial purpose of Vastu. The Sutradhara holds a string, in order to set out the building on site. The fact that evenness was considered a desirable quality is corroborated, for example, by the descriptions of the Buddhist Pure Lands, where the ground is perfectly even. Such preference may be due to a variety of diverse, context-bound rationales. In the specific instance of Vastu, though, since one of its main purposes is to make the earth more orderly and comfortable, it is understandable how uneven ground is, construction-wise, more manageable and less arduous. Let us also remark that the word visema, although etymologically translatable as uneven, also carries the extended sense of inconvenient or even dangerous. The universe of a ruler, cosmogony, cosmology, and the role of the king. Chapter 4 offers an account of the origin of the universe, from its undifferentiated beginnings to the unfolding of the subtlest distinctions, in accordance with basic principles of Sankhya philosophy. It could be read more precisely as a theistic form of Sankhya, sources for which might have been scant even in medieval India. Chapters 4 to 7 perform the crucial function of locating the activity of Vastu, the main topic, within a larger framework of time and space. The text starts by describing a cosmic time, which repeats itself in the cyclical unfolding of the same structure. Chapter 4, then it describes the space we inhabit now, with continents, mountains and so forth. Chapter 5, and finally, it gradually approaches events coeval to King Pathu and hence, to the disclosure of Vastu, chapters 6 and 7. The latter became desirable due to a fall in the condition of humans, originally living along with the gods. We may say that these portions offer a very broad ideological rationale for the necessity of this branch of knowledge. Pru is anointed by Brahma himself as the ruler of all humans, entrusted with the daunting tasks of assisting them, now that their state of effortless living has become impossible due to the loss of the wish-fulfilling tree. The king, true to his call, wishes to even out the earth and make it more livable for the social groups he has just created, a flashback in time from the temporal location of the initial section of the text. The birth of Vastu as a whole can be seen in its similarity to the birth of this specific Vastusastra, the Samrangana Sutradhara. Both, it is implicitly suggested, come from the righteous wishes of a benevolent king. The analogy between Pathu and Pohar is inescapable. Let us also remember that Pathu is the primordial king, the origin of the very words Kshatriya and Rajan, and that his first task was, after all, to milk the earth by making it even. The grid of Vastu, the sections on the basic grid of the Vastu Purusa, and the deities that inhabit it, are relatively short and schematic. The fundamental idea is quite clear: a construction site is like a person, Purusa, also perhaps a soul, with weak and strong points laid out at precise junctures of his organism. The builder should take careful account of this fact if the building is to live a healthy life. Similarly, a map of deities signifies that different areas will be more or less appropriate for specific purposes. Residential architecture in the list of topics represented by the questions of 6 Vakarman's Son, the chapters on residential architecture appear prominently. They have been translated and studied in great detail by Felix Otter. His careful comments point to a basic difficulty in translating the text. The exact meaning of technical terms is disputable and perhaps often shifting. The problem is not only with Vastu, but with many branches of knowledge which refer to material culture. In Ayurveda, for example, names of plants seem to refer to different species altogether according to regional usage. Similar difficulties are found when translating Buddhist Vinaya texts, wherein the objects referred to may have been out of use for centuries. Vastu is in a slightly better position, inasmuch as architectural remains are far better preserved than remains of daily, easily degradable objects, but that does not quite include wooden buildings. When I say that the sense of the terms may be shifting, this includes even fundamental terminology, in particular, words for measurements like bga, pada and so forth, are not used with perfect consistency. The standard manner in which Felix Otter has translated compounds including bga and a numeral, for example, would not work in some sections. More specifically, Otter takes pega to signify a fraction, while Shukla understands it as a term of absolute measure. Either solutions do not work in case of, for example, where pega has to be taken as a synonym of pada. Paskimottara Bagastha Vapim Apica Karaitlva Sagrai Vapade Gandurvasia Ca Bahayatat. Both pada and bdiga here refer to a square in a grid. These considerations bear upon a basic issue: to what extent was the Samrangana Sutradhara linked to actual building practices? If a medieval reader would have been able to determine the sense of its technical terms with precision in each instance, it must have depended on a good deal of instruction from an expert. There are, predictably, some chapters on the Sthapati, architect, and his desirable good qualities, on rituals for various remedial purposes, on the choice of building materials, and so forth. In other words, there are several more sections dealing with matters that may clearly have relevance to the process of building a secular or sacred structure. Machines, and Flying Machines in 1959, a text attributed to no less than Sage Bharadvaja, and obtained as a revelation, allegedly traced back to sage Bharadvaja, in the late 19th century, was published in South India. Its subject matter was flying machines, constructed in a variety of materials, including donkeys, cows, and elephant urine, a delicious sweet dish called payakamriya, and of course, several different metals. One of the machines, the Sakunavamana, was shaped like a wedding cake resting on the side of a giant fish. Another would fly at a speed of at least 8,000 miles per hour, never achieved by any modern aircraft within the atmosphere. Pandit Subbaraya Shastri had drawings of these planes made, and even tried to construct models, but they did not fly. Such a discouraging account may tempt one to group the Samrangana Sutradhara's treatment of flying vehicles in the same category of disappointing fancy. Yet, it would be a rather unfair comparison. Being the only unequivocal ancient Indian source on building aeroplanes, Bhoha's work has attracted considerable attention in recent times. A casual internet search will make this clear. However, I would like to shift the query from the obvious, but strictly speaking unanswerable questions, did they try, did they work, to another set of considerations that bear upon the entirety of the text. The author states something that should not pass unobserved: the instructions to make flying machines are, purposely, incomplete. Due to ethical considerations, the descriptions are not enough to effectively make any real aeroplane. The construction of the machines has not been explained, for the sake of secrecy, and not due to lack of knowledge. In that respect, that should be known as the reason. The authors conclude their article in a less than complimentary manner: none of the planes has properties or capabilities of being flown. The geometries are unimaginably horrendous from the point of view of flying, and the principles of propulsion make them resist rather than assist flying. One interesting section describes the king's palace, commending a specific type of location, shape, and distribution of inner sections. What makes this portion particularly worthy of attention is that recently Michael Willis has located a likely candidate for Bhoha's own actual palace site, which opens up a good possibility of comparative analysis between textual practices and their application on the ground. Temple architecture. In terms of sheer bulk, the chapters on temples occupy the largest part of the work. Although this is not particularly at odds with Vastu treatises in general, what is here worth noticing is that the topic is not quite included in the list at the beginning of the treatise. Hence, it is not impossible that some, or much, of the material included in these sections may be a later, perhaps gradual, addition. What is rather striking about the temple chapters is how, in terms of temple types, they are all inclusive. Despite being a text of the northern tradition, and associated to a ruler of central India, we find here a lengthy discussion of Dravida structures, up to 12-story temples. A large part of the temple descriptions are extremely schematic and would allow for remarkable variation in terms of how one may fill that scheme. No precise picture of the decorative elements comes through, some are barely mentioned, in fact, and in several cases we find the repetition of the very same scheme, with minor permutations when applied to a different type. The process is quite mechanical, to the extent that some architectural elements appear not even to have been listed explicitly, when context would make their repetition understood. If these chapters were indeed intended to have a linking with actual building practices, it is likely that a good deal of oral explanation would have been necessarily attached to the text. This feature is not at all an oddity in the context of traditional Indian sastras. Other topics related to buildings nonetheless, the lengthy chapter was felt worth including in this large Visti treatise. If at all one wished to put it into practice, extra information, perhaps to be provided in person, would have to be acquired. Although this may be the case due to the esoteric nature of the knowledge involved in the specific chapter, What bears upon the entirety of the work is that a gap between textual and extra-textual knowledge is explicitly mentioned, and nowhere seen as a flaw. The list of qualifications of someone who would be able to actually make the machines is worth mentioning: connection to a traditional lineage, skill, direct instructions. The section which contains a description of aeroplanes is part of a large treatment of machines in general, Vantra. The philosophy behind the efficacy of the yantra depends upon a theory of elements and seeds, bearing some resemblance to the basic outline of Samkhya, hence the cosmological bent of the text becomes once more relevant. In the treatment of yantras, an overall intellectual motive might be at play. An advanced theory about the elemental world is applied, perhaps only speculatively, to a branch of technological knowledge. Visual arts, human types, Rasa and Abhinaya. The section of sculpture and painting is fairly large and detailed, covering a variety of related topics: iconography, painting proper, clay and stucco, and lastly, an interesting section that is closely related to other types of sastras. The three final chapters of the manuscript tradition fit the context of Vastu due to their link with the visual representation of humans. However, their close connection to other branches of knowledge, and in one case, disproportionate length, makes them resemble independent works, perhaps attached in a collage-like fashion. As we shall see, the specific wording of the last chapter corroborates this view. The subject matter of human typology is particularly important to Kamagastra, erotic science, a branch of knowledge not so intuitively connected to temple architecture. However, the link is quite clear to anyone who may have observed the sculpture on the walls of a number of sacred structures throughout India, Khajuraho being a particularly well-known example. Chapter 81 shows remarkable terminological echoes of Karmadolashtra treatises. Yet, an important set of depictions is lacking, that of the desirable and undesirable coupling of types. This in itself suggests a different field of application, the craft of representing humans, rather than that of lovemaking. The chapter on aesthetic flavors and gazes relates explicitly to paintings. Interestingly, it lists 11 rasas, although one, due to the poor condition of the manuscript, is incomprehensible. The basic rationale is indeed identical to that of the Natyarastra, but is applied to paintings. Certain bhavas, emotive states, often visible as physical reactions, elicit the enjoyment of a specific rasa, and their visible reactions on the body can be visually depicted. In other words, this brief chapter tells us how to paint a certain rasa into the representation of a human figure. The edge of the forehead is rubbed, the eyes are reddened and wide open, the teeth bite the lower lip, that is called furious flavor. Chapter 83, by far the longest of the chapters related to visual arts, and the incomplete section of the entire work, deals with what are, unmistakably, dance gestures. It is of course quite possible to employ these as guidelines for sculpture, relief, or even paintings, yet, much of the wording of the text strongly suggests that it was originally and primarily intended for dance performers themselves, much like the Abhinaya Darpana, which it resembles in terms of sentence structure and terminology. On occasion, it is explicitly stated that something is enjoined for dancers, nataka, or that it is employed by the experts on dance. Perhaps more than any other chapter, it points at the heterogeneous nature of this text, and suggests its being a compilation of diverse sources. The Samrangana Sutradhara may appear rather surprising to someone who expects anything resembling a manual in the modern sense. The text does not include sufficiently detailed instructions for anyone wishing to put it into material practice. In other words, one cannot read the book and then build a temple. This is surely a simplistic statement, since it would also be inaccurate to say that the text provides no guidelines at all in that direction. What I intend to stress, though, is that the guidelines are given in a context and manner differ substantially from modern cultural practices that may have similar concerns. What the text surely does is to place Vastu within a wider context, and also, to locate a great variety of specialized topics and activities, such as choosing materials, building machines, identifying regional temple styles, and so forth, within the broader framework of Vastu, and within the intellectual world of its author, S. It subsumes Vastu into the world, and at the same time the world into Vastu.